and send shivers down your spine. Shrieking skulls will shock your soul.
So it's Halloween, a time where I've previously talked about scary levels twice, scary Easter eggs, or scary things from a particular series. But I think for this year, we should remove any restrictions. When games aren't trying to entertain us or trying to press home some kind of profound message, they're usually trying to scare the ever-loving shit out of us. It does raise a question why we keep coming back, really. I hesitate to call it Stockholm Syndrome, but the rush you get from getting scared by a game is something you'll pursue again to see if another game can replicate it and how they differ in execution. Because let's be honest, there's a lot of ways to scare someone. Which means, due to fear being subjective as hell, that this list is going to be a tad more anecdotal than you might think. What scares me might not necessarily scare you. But I'm sure we can come to some sort of agreement here. Otherwise I might have to chuck jump scares all over the place. You wouldn't like that. The original Metal Gear Solid may have scared the public out of their skin when Psycho Mantis showed up and threw his psychic fourth wall breaking talents all over the place, but would you believe me if I told you that the sequel offered up an even more terrifying way of breaking the fourth wall? Well, yeah, you would. It's Hideo Kojima at the helm. The man doesn't take prisoners. So around about the point where not quite poster boy Raiden gets captured by the bad guy, tortured by the bad guy, and then told by the bad guy that he was a child soldier, Raiden escaped the torture chamber naked as a jaybird in an attempt to find Solid Snake in his gear. And then things get weird. As if doing cartwheels as butt-naked Raiden wasn't enough, frequent codec calls from Rose and Campbell don't really break the fourth wall, it just kinda picks it up and puts it to one side for later. From telling you to switch off your console to warning you not to sit so close to your TV, it's not exactly as subtle as Psycho Mantis, and that is not something I thought I'd be saying. Then Colonel Campbell starts talking about scissors and how he was abducted by aliens, and all this time you're avoiding elite soldiers with no way to defend yourself. It's a surreal experience, it really is. One of the only times in a game where I've literally asked, what the fuck is going on? MGS2 turns the game on its head in such a bizarre way that you can't help but feel a little scared as you wander around with no clue what's actually happening. After all, nightmares rarely make sense. The Last of Us is described, by its own website incidentally, as a genre-defining experience with a story-driven adventure that combines survival and action elements into one of the best games this generation. And yeah, it does a lot of good things, but considering its genre is survival horror, I wouldn't really elevate it on a pedestal that others should copy. I mean, sure, it does the whole ammo conservation thing, so every shot matters quite a lot, but there weren't too many moments that actually scared me. But luckily, a trip to a hotel's basement gave me more than enough to chew on. A few times in The Last of Us, you need to power up a generator to get some electricity flowing around the general area that you're in, usually to switch some lights on or to activate something. And generators generally aren't very quiet. And hey, when you don't have any power, guess what else you don't have? For the most part, half a clue where you're going. Yeah, it means that the more elaborate versions of restoring power require you to poke around in the dark trying to forge a path to the generator. And trying to do this in the hotel basement is absolute torture. As if the journey wasn't bad enough with so many ambient sounds to keep you company in the near pitch black darkness, turning on the generator on any other difficulty than easy mode, you pussy, sends a group of infected to welcome you. And if you're not prepared, the shift in mood will smack you around the face pretty hard. And that fucking bloater. Not nice, guys. I don't know about you, but my opinion of something isn't generally swayed by the massive hysteria either for or against it. There's a big difference between a couple dozen people telling me to like something and my own first-hand experience of it concluding that it was actually pretty decent. So with subsequent releases in the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, fuck, that was a mouthful, and with the baying crowd having moved on to later titles, I decided to return to the first game to pick it apart a bit more. And it certainly does have its moments. Despite my hatred for jump scares, you can quickly work out in Five Nights at Freddy's that this only happens if you fuck up, rather than the game deciding to throw it in your face in an attempt to be spooky. And yet this wasn't what left a lasting impression on me, nah. Outlined rules like these are only there to be broken later. That's why the real terror is to be found if you spend too long looking at this poster, or rather if you look at this poster and it happens to look like this. because when you return from looking at cameras, a golden version of Freddy is waiting for you in your office, giving you one of the more unique jump scares in the game and forcibly closing you out of the game. This was the watershed moment for me with this game. That light bulb coming on that says, you know, Five Nights at Freddy's is pretty special. Fucking terrifying, but special. First-person perspective in a video game isn't always a good thing. I mean, sure, you might feel more immersed in a situation, but you also lose quite a lot of the peripheral vision you had with a third-person perspective. You sort of develop this tunnel vision where you don't pay attention to your flanks, and most importantly of all, to what's behind you. It really is the most basic of tactic, really. Sneak up behind someone and when they turn around, fuck them up. Combine it with something straight from the uncanny valley, the no man's land between real life and the manufactured, you know, fake things with human features like puppets and, I don't know, Donald Trump. Condemned had the right idea. It introduces these mannequins earlier in the game who just kind of stand there at doing very little. But a little further down the road, in a dimly lit room that practically screams scary shit coming soon, these mannequins suddenly got a lot more aggressive. You know Doctor Who's Weeping Angels? Those nasty fuckers that sneak up on you every time you turn your back or even fucking blink? Well, someone decided it would be cool if the mannequins did that too. Except there's dozens of them. They can't do anything to you, but sweet Jesus, you'll be riding that wave of adrenaline you get from them for a long time. My personal favourite bit though, jumping down that hole at the end and looking up. Hi. Fearing the unknown can be very powerful. It's at least half of what makes the Fallout series so effective. You want to explore this vast world, but you never know exactly what is waiting for you in the next area. And Fallout 3 really does have some scary moments. I imagine that Fallout 4 will pick up this baton in a couple of weeks. And exploring more of the wasteland just yields more opportunities for the game to relieve you of the contents of your bowels. Especially when you find the Dunwich building. Fuck this place, seriously, fuck this place. Fallout 3 isn't anywhere near a horror game, but that just means that you don't expect this kind of shit. You relax in your seat knowing that the worst you might come across is an unsettling building with weird people living in there. But then Dunwich flips the switch and it's full on horror. It's Fallout 3's ghost house, and I'm not saying that just because it's a little scary. It is one of the only places in that game that is supernatural in nature, and indeed, one of the very few to actually use proper jump scares. Whereas other areas were only trying to creep you out a little, Dunwich pulls no punches and goes straight for fear tactics. Don't forget that ghoul mask. Psychological horror games are a real sight to behold when played correctly. The idea is to prey on holes in the human psyche and to explore the fears that everyone has, rather than just a select couple that might cause someone to jump out of their seat. This is part of what makes Amnesia: The Dark Descent so effective because, let's face it, not too many people enjoy being chased by a monster around a foreboding castle, but also because it screws with your mind if you don't keep an eye on your sanity. But it's possible that you won't come across the monster that often if you play your cards right. But if you enter that room full of water, there's not a lot you can do to avoid that. Water in a horror game is just an invitation for trouble. It'll slow you down a bit and make quite a bit of noise at the same time, effectively painting a giant target on yourself. But it also works in the same way that hearing footsteps on hard surfaces instills fear. Hearing someone else following behind you due to the water splashes is not a good thing. Suddenly all that built up tension in Amnesia reaches a spectacular head as you're thrashing your way through water and leaping from box to box as if the floor was lava. Honestly, it might as well be. The contrast between something camp and stupid and something more serious is a commonly used technique to heighten the effect of the more serious thing. It's used a lot in the Metal Gear games, throw around some really dumb moments to lull the audience into a false sense of security, and then hit them with some much heavier stuff. And you can use this quite nicely in a horror game as well. Gee, a camp horror game? I knew they were up to something in Resident Evil 4, I just wasn't too sure what. Parts of this game are very surreal, and not in a weird scary thing that my mind can't comprehend kind of way. No, seriously, after the chilling opening with the village people and guys with chainsaws, you're thrust into the presence of Spanish Napoleon and this random cult leader. It's a really odd part of the game, but waiting just a little way around the corner is one of the scariest enemies from any game. But it's the way that the Regenerators rush up on you in this game. Suddenly Resi 4 stops being eccentric and ramps up the tension before throwing these nearly invincible creatures your way. Resident Evil 4 didn't feel too much like a horror game in places, but the reveal of the Regenerators made me realise that this game knew what it was doing from the very beginning. Still can't get over their breathing. Life as a thief isn't easy. You've got to go into some really weird places to find things to steal, but it's all okay because as long as you make it out unscathed, you can consider it a worthwhile experience. But I really would question the mentality of, hey, let's go searching around an abandoned char-grilled orphanage stroke insane asylum because it might have something valuable in it. It's like seeing a cookie in the middle of a motorway and thinking, I'm having that. The dynamic of Thief games set themselves up so that the main character Garrett is the most intimidating part of any situation. He goes around stealing things without anyone noticing. That's going to strike a bit of fear into most people. But the Shalebridge Cradle makes it so that the environment is the scariest thing in the room. And this place has a lot of rooms. To really appreciate the Shalebridge Cradle for what it is, you've got to remember how to scare someone, and with most people, your imagination can do most of the work for you. You don't need monsters popping up every minute or so for a location to be scary. The knowledge that there's something around here making the occasional wailing noise is enough to drive you mad as you try and pinpoint its location. The first half of the Shalebridge Cradle is devoid of any big monster, just a load of creepy ambient sounds and clanging gates. Really, you almost have to have your audio turned up to a decent volume to keep your wits about you, and as we all know, high audio plus creepy situation equals impending pain. And yet it only comes to a peak when you switch the power on, a la The Last of Us's Generators. Again, with the screaming really loudly for any otherworldly being to hightail it to your location. Nothing is merely shown to you, a good chunk is down to your own interpretation. And people don't tend to perform well mentally in these kind of conditions. I can't imagine why. So what really makes something scary? I said in the beginning that not everyone is going to be scared by the same thing, but there are a few ways to get around that. Namely, you can prey on what the player finds creepy and maybe not necessarily make them fear something, but make them so uncomfortable that they feel more vulnerable to everything else. And I knew about Pyramid Head long before I got a chance to play Silent Hill 2, and yet it didn't make a damn bit of difference. As if the town of Silent Hill wasn't unsettling enough, having the Pyramid Heads wandering about doesn't help in the slightest, but it's the first time that you see them in action that really sets the tone. I mean, there's making an entrance and then there's raping mannequin monsters while you hide in a nearby closet. Only the hardest of souls who spent years on the internet becoming desensitized wouldn't recoil at this spectacle, and it really sets a precedent for what's to come later in the game, especially since you're not really involved much in this scene. It might not be inherently scary, but goddamn, there's nothing normal about this. Missing out on fulfilling potential is something that is becoming more and more common these days. The Order 1886 could have been a lot more than just a shiny turd if the game behind it was any good. Metal Gear Solid 5 could have been the greatest game for a generation if more time was given to finish it. And PT, you could have been the greatest horror game anyone had ever seen. Now, you might wonder what I can narrow down from this game to put on a list about scary moments, and the reality is that PT, or Silent Hills, is so consistent in its tone with every little minute detail working towards the bigger picture that you can't put one moment ahead of the others. As a compromise, PT never got past being a playable demo, so it will simply go down in gaming history as a moment. And yet this short insight into what could have been managed to overshadow nearly every big name release last year. It was a perfect storm of what was possible when you have a dream team of Hideo Kojima, Guillermo del Toro, and Norman Reedus, all working towards one project that they were exceedingly passionate about. The attention to detail in this game is staggering. There's subtle oddities that points to a darker overtone. Looping corridors, the guy on the radio, changes in lighting, changes in your environment. It all works perfectly towards the bigger picture. PT doesn't try and scare you with huge, jarring jump scares. It's a slow burner, but with enough pace to it that you feel like you're being pushed along, out of your comfort zone. And personally, that's all I could ever ask from a horror game. This has been RabbidLuigi, and maybe the biggest horror is that this game never got a full release. That this kind of potential was flushed down the drain just because of a few disputes. It's hard to say if it would have been able to keep up this quality for a full release, but it gave new hope to a stagnating genre. Maybe the biggest horror actually is that Konami still haven't stopped digging their own grave. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. It's been very weird this week making a countdown for Saturday instead of Sunday. I suddenly had one less day to play with, so I had to plan things further in advance, and it could have gotten messy, but, you know, I think it turned out alright. Anyway, I'm back to top 5s next week, and there's a poll going on right now over on Twitter and Facebook that you might want to check out. I'm sure there's something there that will take your fancy.